The latest tech.
I'm Alexa. I can answer your questions.
Interviews.
And we are evolving, and we are seeing an amazing opportunity that's happening.
Accessibility.
Accessibility is one of our core values.
This is Double Tap TV.
Welcome to another edition of Double Tap TV. Thank you guys so much for being here this week. I am Mark Aflalo, and Stephen Scott is always alongside for the ride. Stephen, an exciting episode lined up this week because we're doing that thing that I love to do, which is skate that gray line between tech and other conversation. And this week it's about filmmaking. And, you know, when it comes to filmmaking, this genre really has grown so far beyond the big screen. We have so many screens at our disposal that really so many people can claim to be a filmmaker. But this week we're going to be speaking to someone who definitely earned that moniker, did he not?
He certainly did. And this is a guy who, I mean, when you think about filmmaking, you don't think about blindness, do you? I imagine, Mark, the idea of being blind and making movies seems foreign. How would that even work? Well, it can be done. Now, James is legally blind. James Rath is who we're going to be speaking to today. He is legally blind, but he has got a little bit of vision. He'll explain more about that later and how he uses that vision. And actually, for a lot of people who've got low vision, sometimes using a camera is the only way they can actually see the world around them. Because if you think about it, if you've got a little bit of vision through one part of your eye, holding that viewfinder and a camera up to your eye will give you access to the whole world in front of you and be able to see things you weren't able to see before. So actually filmmaking, when you think of it in those terms, actually makes a lot of sense for a lot of blind people because you're actually able to see better through a camera lens than you can through your own eye lens. You know,
filmmaking is such a subjective profession. I mean, it's all about the creativity and the mind of the person who's creating what you're about to see. So whether you have vision or not really is it's kind of moot because, anybody can have a vision whether they can see things or not. It's about translating that vision so that other people can consume that. And I think that technology, and this is where we cross that line, technology, just as you said, using a camera helps, people who are low vision actually experience this. Technology really has enabled this kind of profession and others like it and allow people to take it to a level that I don't think even they probably thought they could do before.
No, absolutely. And you're right. Technology, once again, changing lives, making people able to do things that they weren't able to do. And this doesn't just apply to James Rath or any blind filmmakers. This applies to anybody. This applies to you. It's about knowledge, isn't it? It's about knowledge on how to use the product. You need to have the general understanding of the principle of filmmaking in this case. You need to be able to tell a story as well. You can be the greatest filmmaker in the world, but if you can't tell a story, then you're not going to go very far. I often liken it to if you gave me Steven Spielberg's camera and said, make a movie, it would be terrible. But if I gave Steven Spielberg my 50 quid camcorder, then he'd make a masterpiece out of it. He'd make the biggest blockbuster you'd seen because he knows how to use the technology, but he also knows how to tell a story and how to create that. So, vision is definitely, some might see it as disabling, but actually with the right technology, that can actually enable you to do so much more.
What do you think distinguishes someone as a filmmaker, by profession, other than obviously than getting paid to do it, versus someone who is out there doing, just YouTube style videos? Have we blurred the lines a little bit these days?
Well, I think, again, technology does that. I mean, some of the tech that James is going to talk about later, he'll be discussing how he makes his YouTube videos and how he creates content for the internet. And of course, it's a lot simpler than a lot of people might think it is. Whereas when it comes to filmmaking, you're using much more expensive, much higher end gear that makes it possible to get the best scenes, the best pictures, the best whatever. I think we are getting close to blurring that line, though, because people's viewing habits have changed. The coronavirus has changed how we view television, for example. If you imagine most of our programs coming to us via Zoom or via Skype or from someone's iPhone, that would have been unheard of in television circles especially. But we've accepted that that's the new norm and that's okay, and it allows us to continue to get content. And that will translate, and it has already translated to the big screen, where some big movies have been made, or at least in part, with smartphones. So the technology is there, and the technology itself is causing the blur. I think. That it's causing the blur between what is classed as film and what is classed as content created for the internet.
You know, I'm excited to get James on the show, obviously to talk about his perspective, but to see how technology has helped him to excel beyond, where he may have even thought his expectations were. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to bring James on the show. I'm excited to talk to him. I'm excited to hear your conversation with him. This is Double Tap TV. He is Stephen Scott. I am Mark Aflalo. If you guys want to get involved, no problem. We've got a couple ways for you to do that. Our email address is feedback@doubletap.online. Send us an email and we'll get back to those as soon as we can. And of course, at Doubletap Canada on Twitter. And if you use that hashtag #AskDoubletap, then we will get to your questions and of course, hopefully try to answer them to the best of our ability, or perhaps get our guests to answer them. We take a quick break on Double Tap TV and come back with our featured guest of this week's program.
Love Double Tap TV? Listen to AMI Audio for Double Tap Canada every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern for news and reviews on everything tech. This is Double Tap TV.
We are back on Double Tap TV. Thank you guys so much for being here and being along for the ride. If you want to get in touch with us, no problem. We've got a couple ways for you to do that. Our email address is feedback@doubletap.online. You could shoot us an email anytime you want. We get to those as quickly as we possibly can. On Twitter, another way to get in touch is @DoubleTapCanada. And if you use that hashtag #AskDoubleTap, then we will get to your questions on a future show, we promise, or of course on Double Tap Canada on AMI Audio. Stephen Scott, we're about to dive into a conversation that you had with a guy that goes by the name The Blind Filmmaker. But rather than you introduce him, let's take a look at one of his videos introducing himself.
Hey, I'm James Rath. I'm a filmmaker, and I was born blind, legally blind. This is how my camera sees, and this is how I see. I graduated high school with a 1.8 GPA. No one thought to offer Braille, to the blind student. After graduating, I moved from Delaware to Los Angeles. I did this in search for independence and accessibility. This is me surfing. I'm not a surfer. I enjoy hiking, riding horses, gaming, and steering boats, but I've never driven a car. In 2016, I made a film about accessible technology. A year later, I interviewed the CEO of Apple. He got the job. Growing up, I never saw people like myself represented. Maybe I just couldn't see them. This is me directing a multi-year commercial campaign for Tommy Hilfiger. It also won at Cannes Lions. That's me. At MIT, I studied at the Sloan School about what it means to be a leader in the digital age. Ever since I independently traveled cross-country, I've had the opportunity to travel the world. I'm an accessibility consultant for games, movies, and tech. I'm a film director. Award-winning director, that is. I'm a speaker. I get vulnerable so I can help others see different. I share accessible experiences. I tell stories from within the disability community.
So yeah, that's me, James Rath. And I hope that we can see different together.
And with me now is James Rath. Hi to you, James.
Hi. Good morning or afternoon on your neck of the woods.
Whatever time of day it is. Who knows? How would we know? Listen, James, it's great to have you with me here. Thank you so much for your time. I don't know where to start, frankly. There's so many questions I want to ask you about what you do. I guess the first obvious question is, how did you get into filmmaking as a visually impaired guy?
Well, it kind of goes back to my youth. I just always liked telling stories. I was making comics and stuff. Writing stories. They weren't like anything, what came out of a 7-8-year-old's imagination, right? And eventually I sort of came across a camera in my parents' basement, and I got a little bit intrigued. I've seen my mom using it at like family events, and so I turned it on, and there's all these like controls on it, like zoom and peak focus and stuff like that, and it pretty much, very much fascinated me being able to actually start making out detail, because without going into like full on detail, I can start making out a little bit of detail like from about 2 inches away from my eyes. But other than that, everything's just this big constant blur. And so for me, it was really cool being able to like see things in my basement all of a sudden, like actually like zooming in and making out what things were. And then I'm like, well, we could go shoot something with this, me and the neighborhood kids, right? So that's pretty much how I got started. We just making little silly films at 8 years old in the neighborhood, 9 years old. And Yeah, it very much, it all started on a VHS. For those who aren't aware, VHS is these old tapes.
I can't believe you have to say that.
I know.
That just makes me feel so old when you have to explain what a VHS tape is.
You still have to explain what a DVD is now.
Well, let's talk about your filmmaking career because, there's so much to talk about, but of course this is a tech program, so I've got to ask you about the tech. How do you do it? What do you use?
So it really depends on the format, right? I've done things from directing documentaries that have a crew of 14 people to commercials that have a crew of like 80 people on set, right? And we're working off of Alexas and Red cameras. My videos, like things that I'm creating from home or for brand integrations, stuff like that. Then, yeah, typically I'm using DSLRs. I have a cinema camera. I'm currently shooting with Canon. A lot of these cameras offer remote, wireless remotes, as in like using your iPad or your phone as a viewfinder and a touch screen enabled, pretty much like being able to set the autofocus, being able to set the manual focus just from your phone, which is really cool. So I use that. My Canon cinema camera allows me to do it through a web address in Safari. And then my DSLR lets me do it through an actual app, which is kind of cool. So I use that, and then sometimes I just shoot with an iPhone, because there are times where, yeah, I want to shoot something, I just need to tell a story or share something, but I also need voiceover right now. I need a screen reader. I need something to help me, and it's fully compatible with doing that. I pop in like an AirPod or even just some headphones into the phone, and that way you don't actually hear the voice, right, when you're recording, and then I can just do my thing. I can just do whatever I need to do, and it will still tell me, hey, one face, two face, bottom left-hand corner, right? So it's really adapting at the end of the day. If it's a big commercial set, I got people for that, right? And just like any film set, any director's gonna have people for that. It's not I'm blind, so I'm gonna have sighted people do the work for me. No, it's always been like that. And then if it's me and just me, and or very small amounts of people, I could shoot on like a phone, as little as that. There's some amazing films actually that are being awarded at like Sundance and all these film festivals, and even commercials being shot on phones, especially now that a lot of people are in quarantine and trying to still do the commercials, right? Like very few percentage of productions here in America are still shooting, but some are doing it and adapting to sort of a phone a format. So it's interesting.
It is interesting, and I think you're right. I think the iPhone, it's almost the simplest answer, but it's also, in some cases, the most powerful answer. The power's in your pocket, quite literally. James, stay with us. We're going to talk more about this, because I want to ask you, from thinking of people who are just getting into this world, or at least are aspiring to get into the world of filmmaking, going back to your sort of earlier thoughts on getting started and what you did, and sharing some of those insights with us. So stay right there, James. We're going to continue this conversation in a few moments.
So let's do that. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back with more of Stephen Scott and James Rath at his Double Tap TV. Stick around. We'll be back in just a moment.
For more great Double Tap TV content, visit ami.ca/doubletap. This is Double Tap TV.
Welcome back to Double Tap TV. Thank you guys so much for being here. I am Mark Aflalo. You guys can get in touch with us by email. It's feedback@doubletap.online. On Twitter, we are at DoubleTapCanada with the hashtag AskDoubleTap. And Stephen Scott is standing by with our guest for this week's show, James Rath, otherwise known as the Blind Filmmaker.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. Back with James Rath here, the Blind Filmmaker. Is it okay to call you blind, James? Because I know everyone has their own view on visually impaired, partially sighted, legally blind. What's the right phrase for you? How do you identify?
No, I'm cool with blind, because very much my vision is fluctuating throughout the day. I'm always going to be legally blind. There's no way to correct that or change that. But the moment I strain my eyes too much, the very little sight that I have, everything is just a huge blur, and I really can't identify anything. And I identify with blind, legally blind, either or. So
Yeah, I think the most interesting stat I learned was that 4% of people in the world who are blind actually, can see nothing at all, whereas the 96% can see something. And I think we shouldn't shy away from the word blind. I totally agree with you on that. Look, let's get back to the topic we have got you here for this week, and that is blind filmmaking and the whole subject of it, because I'm fascinated by this. Obviously, I do TV, although in fairness, TV, James, is me sitting in front of a camera here and speaking, and I've got my wonderful producer, Mark Aflalo, and co-host here, who does all the real work. I don't get involved in that because I'm a radio guy, right? What do I know about television? And certainly nothing about film, other than watching it. But I'm fascinated by this because I've always been intrigued by it, and I've thought, I don't know if my level of vision is enough to allow me to do it successfully. And having the iPhone, for example, you mentioned this in the last segment, having the iPhone is a very powerful tool. Is it capable enough to, out of the box, essentially create a good film, or do you need enough vision or a little bit of vision to be able to manipulate what you're seeing through the screen, through the viewfinder, if you like?
Well, there's definitely some principles when it comes to composition and lighting. And if you, as a person who has no vision or little vision, can learn and study the light sources, right, in the environment that you're shooting in. If you can become familiar with that and learn how light, even without seeing it or seeing very little of it, can manipulate a shot, what makes a good shot, how to use lighting to your advantage, as well as just knowing composition, becoming familiar with how much of the phone is capturing. And then when you zoom in to the 0.5 times, or times 2, and then zooming out to the 0.5 times of the widescreen, right, the wide shot, it can really, I think, be a very powerful creation tool. Again, story is most important and key, and really the visuals and the audio, of course. Audio is 50% of video. I firmly stand by that. So that is one thing I think that a lot of us blind folks are keen in, is we're very tuned in with our hearing, right? We aren't hearing more than anyone else, but we are paying attention to it, right? So we can become familiar with that. So that can definitely be used to your advantage, especially on the audio side of from radio. But yeah, I think the iPhone's very capable with just the camera app that it comes with. You can download other things like Filmmaker Pro, and there's the Moment camera app. There's other camera apps out there that maybe let you go into more detail or play with some different features, right? Adjusting ISO, manual shutter, and all that. But that all aside, you can really do a lot with just the camera app of the iPhone. So again, just familiarizing yourself with the fundamentals and the principles of a visual shot, cinematography, photography, and it's totally capable. It's possible, even with little to no sight.
What about if you wanted to move on from the iPhone? Maybe you feel that you've got enough vision, or perhaps that a viewfinder and a camera can help, because you've alluded to this, and I've heard others say that having that viewfinder gives you access to vision that you may not have been able to, because you're essentially able to bring your entire world into that small space and see more with it. What's like the best camera? What's a good camera to pick up on and get started with, to use to make movies, or even just take pictures?
I stand by the phone. These phones are made by tech companies, and they prioritize, right? Apple, Google, they're prioritizing accessibility in the software. And that's where it really comes down to is the software of the camera apps. They're just made to be accessible for those of us with low vision, no vision, those of us who have limited mobility, right? And it's great, it's amazing. The camera manufacturers, on the other hand, haven't really caught up with that with their software. As far as I've been able to tell, I've been trying to tune in and keep up to date with any accessibility advances from Sony, Panasonic, Nikon, Canon, Blackmagic, all of them. But there really isn't much. And if anything, if I was to say there's another accessible camera on the market that isn't your smartphone, I'd say GoPro, which is, it serves a purpose, it serves a market. It's not going to be the You don't want that GoPro look for everything, right? If it works for you, great. And there are ways to sort of make it so it's not super, super wide shot, keep it a little bit more narrow, and maybe you could actually potentially vlog with it and, stuff like that. But I would say first answer is your iPhone. If you need action shots and you want to do a little bit more, get a little get it wet and stuff, the GoPro, go ahead and get that. In terms of actual DSLRs, I really can't recommend anything today. And if Canon wants to consult, and get their app, or their software accessible, I'm ready, because I would love to.
Yeah, please call James. Yeah, please get in touch with James, and because you're right. I mean, the first company that does this, it's a bit like gaming. We've talked about gaming on the show, and The Last of Us Part 2. Can other games get on track and be the same and start being as accessible? It just takes one to make the move. Look, before we run out of time, I just want to ask you about editing. Now, I'm a Mac user. I've used iMovie for a number of things. I've moved on to Final Cut Pro because of what I'm doing here. But iMovie's good, isn't it? I mean, iMovie's a great place to start if you're a Mac user and you're blind.
Yeah, iMovie is quite fantastic. And I know that Apple might simplify it on the surface for many people. And you maybe need to break down some of those simplifications, those factors that are put into place to sort of make it easy for just anyone to make a family film or whatever. But it's definitely a great place to start. Even on iOS, right? You have access to fully shooting with an accessible viewfinder with screen reader support right on a camera with the iPhone. Oh, you can also edit, and you can also upload with that same exact device, which is pretty amazing. You can even plug in a keyboard, or do a wireless keyboard in this case, with an iPhone, and you could run VoiceOver with keyboard support right from a phone. If you really do not need the screen at all, why use a computer? So yeah, I think it's iMovie is a great place to start. I use Final Cut personally. I've used Final Cut since my first year of high school, so it's been almost 10 years now. And I love it. Works with VoiceOver too when I need that. And in terms of other editors, it's hard to recommend anything else. Windows Movie Maker really doesn't get support anymore, if at all. And then I know there's Adobe Rush, which might be Adobe's iMovie in a sense. It's the baby brother to Premiere. I don't know how accessible that is, though, to be completely honest. I've not tested it, but it is available on iOS and Windows, so for that cross-compatibility.
Some brilliant ideas, James. And, I didn't even think about iMovie on the iPhone. You're absolutely right. Of course, why wouldn't you want to consider that? It's even easier in some ways. Yeah. Listen, I really appreciate your time. I think you do a fantastic thing, just promoting blindness in such a positive way through the storytelling you do, through the work that you do. James Rath, thank you so much for joining me on Double Tap TV.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you all for being here on this week's edition of Double Tap TV. If you want to get involved, please do reach out to us. It's feedback@doubletap.online. And of course, on Twitter, we are @DoubleTapCanada, and use that hashtag, which is AskDoubleTap. On behalf of James Rath and Stephen Scott, I am Mark Aflalo. We will be here again next week on Double Tap TV.
For more great Double Tap TV content, visit ami.ca/doubletap. Hosted by Mark Aflalo and Stephen Scott. Editing Will Attar. Production assistants Wendy Kaufman. Content review Zachary Aflalo. Voiceover Anna Vicino. Integrated Described Video Specialist Ron Rickford. Coordinating Producer Jennifer Johnson. Director Production Kara Nye. Director Programming Brian Perdue. VP Content Development and Programming John Melville. President and CEO David Arrington. Copyright 2020 Accessible Media Inc.